Welcome everyone to our live webinar and panel discussion, What Israelis Need to Understand, an American Jewish Perspective. I'm Alan Abbey, Media Director at the Shalom Hartman Institute and the moderator of our conversation today. Our program is a part of the David Hartman Memorial Conference for Jewish Democratic Israel, which is held every year on our Jerusalem campus. And this year's conference is facing the challenge of Israel and diaspora relations in a fraught time. Does either community understand the other? Do we in Israel appreciate the contributions of Jewish life in the diaspora? Do diaspora Jews understand the complexities of life in Israel? Can both communities survive and prosper? Do both communities need each other? This is not a new conversation. In a brilliant talk the other day here at the Institute, as we prepared for this conference, our scholar Orit Avneri showed us in many places in the Torah and in the Tanakh that this conversation has been happening since the days of the Bible and the prophets. So our panelists will tackle these age-old issues in light of current events and challenges. Our speakers, beginning from far to near, I won't say left or right, just are Rabbi Shira Koch Epstein. Shira is Executive Director of the 14th Street Y in New York City. Rabbi Avital Hochstein is a Research Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. And Yossi Klein Halevi is a Senior Fellow at the Institute. Our program is being streamed live today online on the Hartman website, our Twitter feed, and our YouTube channel. It's also available to friends of ours at Temple Bethel of Stamford, Connecticut, which is streaming the program on their website, and our friends in Los Angeles who are watching it on the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles website. Thank you for getting up so early. It's 6:45 a.m. in Los Angeles if you didn't realize that. And finally, a warm welcome to our colleagues at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. We hope you're watching in your great new offices in Riverside Drive in New York City, and we look forward to hearing your responses and comments about how the entire conference has gone. So just a few quick ground rules. Each panelist will speak for about 10 minutes. We won't hold them to that exactly, but in that area. Then we'll give each of them a chance to respond to the others, and then we'll open it up back and forth to each other and with some questions. We've already received questions from potential viewers who have signed up to watch it online, and I have a list of those. Plus, those of you here in our audience today are welcome to ask questions as well. And we have a microphone set up for you here to ask questions. And again, as I said, please, when you ask a question, make it the form of a question and not a speech. So the final thing, of course, is that we encourage you and everybody watching online to tweet and post on Facebook throughout this session, although I'd rather not hear the phones ringing. And you can find the Hartman Institute and most of the panelists here on these social media platforms, and any help you can give us with that would be much appreciated. So we're going to jump right into it because I know you want to hear from them much more than you want to hear from me. So Rabbi Shira Koch Epstein, please tell us what Israelis need to understand from our American cousins.
Thank you, and good afternoon or good morning in California. So before I think even the question, what do Israelis need to understand about us, is one that as an American rings in my ears in an uncomfortable way. Whenever someone says, what you need to understand, I think, well, why do you think I need to understand anything? But I do think that understanding between us starts with relationships. And so before I even get to telling you what I hope you'll start to know about me, I think I need to tell you a little bit about who I am and where I'm from, because I think that tells something already. So for those of you who heard me before, you're hearing a little bit of the same thing, this time fully in English. But I'm a rabbi, I'm a Reform rabbi, and I'm actually a fourth-generation American Jew. And my children are fifth-generation American Jews. And so one of the things to know about me is that I don't feel, as Daniel Hartman said in his last lecture, that my identity is about living outside of the land of Israel. I live at home in America, where my family has lived for about 130 years. And my children feel very at home and safe in America. We don't feel that somehow we're living outside or away or in something incomplete. And I think that's an important thing to know about me and about my identity. It doesn't mean, and I'll get later to what the connection is between us, that I don't feel that we have a very important relationship and that we don't have a common history, a common narrative, and hopefully a shared future. But it does mean that I feel at home in the United States. I also think you need to know about me that I told the story that I'm a fourth generation Reform Jew, but I was also raised as a Zionist. That looks different in a lot of American households. In my household, it looked like my little brother in our town where we were the only Jews going to the beach with a kova tembel that said Yisrael on it. It meant having the name Shira and siblings named Yonatan and Matan and Adina and Eitan in the middle of Christian New Milford, Connecticut, where no one could pronounce our names. Because my parents wanted it to be clear that our Jewish identity was central and that we didn't have two different names. That's not true for many Americans. Just as it wasn't true for Esther, Hadassah, it's not true for many Americans who have two names. My parents chose to give me one name, and they looked here as a major Jewish center. They connected to here. They sent me here when I was 15 years old to go on EIE and to live here. And I lived with a family of Russian Olim Chadashim. So the reason I have the Israeli accent, which is not as common, is I lived with a 15-year-old new Israeli who told me that if I said Resh and Daled, I would never fit in. And she practiced with me Resh, Daled, Lamed. I can see some Americans who probably also have tried to do this. And the other thing you need to know is that I grew up on narratives of Israel that are a little bit old. The narratives that I was taught in Hebrew school, like so many, were first of all survival, that we needed Israel to survive after a great disaster. And that was drilled into me, even though my experience was not one of feeling unsafe, but Israel was the great protector of the Jewish people. Another was one of tikuma, of rebirth after that destruction. So it wasn't just survival, but it was also that there was a great rebirth, but it was a utopian rebirth. Israel was going to be the perfect country that lived out all of the Jewish ideals, and as an American Jew, the way we understood Jewish ideals. So that might mean, as Rabbi Riskin said in a session, it might mean the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and happiness, even for the minority. That it meant that there was equality and freedom. And we were shown pictures of women in the 1940s who were carrying guns and shovels and were just as strong and powerful as the men who were carrying guns and shovels. And I would say those guns and shovels were what, as American Jews, we were told we were supposed to revere. So we had a story that was about survival, and we had a story that was about triumph, and we had a story that was about the utopian place that was going to enact all of our dreams as Jewish people. And we also had some narratives that had to do with a mission, that we had a joint mission, and Israel was going to be with sovereignty the place to carry out that mission. Now we also, as I said before, were brought Israelis to meet us, shlichim. When I was a kid, the system wasn't as set up as it is now, where we have shinshinim and junior shlichim, but we had Israeli scouts who came and taught us songs and would teach us how to make pitot on the fire and would fall in love with our teenagers who then would, really want to go back and meet those Israelis. And somehow it was this utopian summer camp experience. And we were taught to fall in love with Israel. So I think even though there are parts of that narrative that we could go into in many ways and unpack, and I know between us, Israelis and Americans, we share a lot of questions about the narratives that we were given at that time, I need to also say that I love you. I was raised to love you, and I fell in love with you. I fell in love with the mythical Israel. I fell in love with the people Israel. I fell in love with the food of Israel. I fell in love with those shlichim who were adorable and sang those great songs that only I and my other friends in the club of those who had knew shlichim could sing together. I knew that I belonged to this venture of Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and somehow to this country. I think I'd be telling an old story if I told you that when I came here in the 90s as a Reform Jew, the country didn't quite live up to the narrative I had been given to expect. And it's an old story to tell about American Jews' disappointment when we got here and didn't find that it reflected all of the utopia that we were told it would be. And I bet there are some Israelis who are disappointed in that as well. And I want to say that I have been given understanding by you that that was an unrealistic expectation, and that you are much broader and more diverse and more nuanced and have so much more happening than anything any shaliach or textbook or newspaper can even show. And so I want to tell you that I'm trying to understand. But I also want to tell you that when I hear that this is the national home of the Jewish people, I'm trying to figure out, what does that mean for me, who feels very at home in North America? And does it mean that we need to negate the diaspora or say that it's less than? As we heard in the last lecture, which was Daniel Hartman spoke about, what does it mean to create a narrative where there is a Zionism that doesn't mean that the diaspora needs to stop existing or needs to be less than? I don't feel that my life is less than. It's different. I don't have sovereignty. That's true. I don't have to do the work of figuring out what it means to live in a state where it is Jewish and I have the political power. But I don't feel that that means that my Jewish expression or my ability to live as a free person in my country and express my Judaism is less than. And so I want to be able to figure out with you, what is a narrative that we can share? Now, in the last session, Daniel Hartman suggested a new metaphor. I came with Avital Gordon and the tree and the roots and the branches and said, actually, I think that metaphor doesn't quite work. It's from 1921, came with some Kaplan from 1955 about the joint venture that we are on as a people. And Daniel Hartman went back to the metaphor of house, and he said he is a parent of adult children, and he suggested that perhaps when you have adult children, they come back to your house, and they may even sometimes have keys to your house, though sometimes not. But there are only certain rooms in the house that they're welcome to rearrange. There are only certain rooms in the house that they're even welcome to go into without permission. And I said, Danielle, I have a critique of that narrative. I agree that you live in a parental house, but I don't think you're the parent. I actually think that we are siblings. We are both the children of the ancestors who called this home. But you are the children who have chosen to move into your parents' house and figure out how to make it your own. And we are children who have built a vibrant house elsewhere, with the traditions and looking back and feeling that love and that sense of wanting to be able to go home again, even if we don't want to make it our house. And I would say, as I said before, I think it's actually harder to create new traditions living in your parents' house even once they're gone than it is to create new traditions or new ways of doing things in a new house that you build. That doesn't mean that you don't want to still have a vibrant home or a vibrant place when the sibling who lives in that home wants to create that vibrant home and figure out what to take, what to leave. But how much harder when you're actually sitting at your parents' table, now that it's yours, to figure out what dinner service looks like than if you're doing it at a different table. So what I'd like to say to Israelis, if the question is what to learn from us, I said this before, come visit us. Just as we come to see you, just as we come to try to understand the nuances and the colors and the flavors and to really see what it is, the difference between what's in the textbooks and what's actually happening, come and see that. Don't decide that our Judaism is dead and dying without coming to experience its vibrancy. Don't decide that it's less than if you haven't actually experienced what it is. And just like I hope that we're not going to write you off, and I work very hard in my work to bring people together, please don't write us off, because I don't think that it is the story of Israel, Eretz Medinat Yisrael, the land of Israel and the state of Israel are the only Jewish future. I believe that there's a Jewish future we will share together, one that is created here and one that is created in North America. And I hope that as adult children, we can have a strong relationship as siblings, not as estranged siblings, but as siblings who are really making decisions together, sometimes apart, and learning from each other.
Thank you very much. Now, Rabbi, you have a foot in two camps, as it were. You've worked in the United States, and of course, you work and live here as well. So, what would you say to what Rabbi Epstein has said about the vibrancy of life in North America and the vibrancy of that Judaism, as opposed to what's Judaism in Israel and the Jewish life in Israel? How would you put that together, Avital?
Thank you. And thank you, Shira, for sharing those thoughts. I guess the first thing I want to say is that this conversation in general is very broad strokes and generalizations. And of course, every individual is much more nuanced in the way they understand their way of life. And I want to give that respect and give it place. And I apologize already for the mistakes that making generalizations does. The second thing I want to say is that indeed I, both at the Hartman Institute and at the Hadar Institute, go back and forth between Israel and America. And I asked some of my American students, what would you like to say to Israelis about your life? What do you think it's important for Israelis to hear? One thing I realized is that the notion of Jews who choose not to live in the land of Israel, the notions of world Jewry, is actually a notion that existed before life in Israel began. Okay? The people of Israel stand on the rim of entering the land before they come in, and there come the tribe of Reuven and the tribe of Gad and half of the tribe of Menashe, and they say, מקנה רב היה לבני ראובן ולבני גד עצום מאוד. We have a lot of cattle. ויראו את ארץ יעזור ואת ארץ גלעד, והנה המקום, מקום מקנה. This land, not in the land of Israel, is actually perfect for our needs. We want to live here. And they request not to come into the land. And I think a very strong voice that I hear, which I think you're saying and I hear from other American Jews, which is really important for me as an Israeli to know, is Americans are telling me, we're happy here. They're telling me we have chosen this life and this place to make our home. We have a very full life, and we have a very full Jewish life. I think that's really important for us to recognize when we enter in a relationship and in a conversation. The second thing I want to point out is an issue of power and our state of mind around power. It's interesting because as Israelis, we live as a majority, we have our own army, and we have sovereignty. We have ownership over power. And yet, when I think of the state of mind of American Jews, I have an opposite picture in my mind, and I think I am the daughter of an American father and a European mom. And when we would travel around the world, my father would, very relaxed, pull out our Israeli passports and so on. And my mom would say, no, hide every sign of you being an Israeli. Okay? And I think it's two different notions of what it is to be a world Jew. But if we think of the American state of mind, which you're very strongly reflecting, American Jews feel very empowered. They're living in a country which is a powerful country. Most of American Jews today are secure financially, have strong education. Their political power is beyond the percent in the population that you actually are. Institutions, Jewish institutions are flourishing in America. We see it with the speed in which the Shalom Hartman Institute grew in the United States. And I think there's a feeling, actually, of American Jews, a feeling very much powerful and the owners of power. Whereas I think the way American Jews perceive us Israelis, or our state of mind, not the reality, but our state of mind, is that we very much live with a consciousness of being under threat, with sometimes with a state of mind of victims and of fear. Now, imagine when planning the high holidays and an Israeli synagogue comes together and they say, okay, so what's the security situation today? how much do we have to invest in a security guard for the high holidays service? Now that we've made that decision, what's left to plan out the rest of the holidays? Okay? Whereas American Jews come and say, okay, what are our main goals for the community this year? Okay, what do we want to invest in socially? What do we want to invest in communally? That is a state of mind that I think we can learn from you. I remember somebody reflecting to me, not only in shul environments, but in government environments. Our government meetings always begin with a skira bitronit. You give me the words in English. A security survey. Okay? How would it look if we actually began with what are our goals for education? What are our goals for culture? So I think there's a state of mind here, whether it reflects reality or not, which is something that world Jews are telling Israelis, maybe you want to choose a different state of mind for your existence. The third point that I think American Jews tell Israelis very often maybe can be encapsulated in the following story, which is from Sifri Dvarim. It's a Tanaitic source, a source from the Mishnah period. And it tells a story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera and Rabbi Matya ben Charash, Rabbi Chanina ben Achi, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yonatan, who were yotzim chutz la'aretz. They were leaving the land of Israel. And as they leave, v'zachru et Eretz Yisrael, they suddenly remember the land of Israel. Zakfu enehem v'zalku dimotehem v'kar'u bigdehem. They picked up their eyes, they started crying and tearing their clothes. Amru, Yeshivat Eretz Yisrael, shkula keneged kol hamitzvot shebatorah. Sitting in the land of Israel is equivalent to all the mitzvot, all the commandments in the Torah. Now, it's true that this story tells us of their tears and of their crying, but I think that between the lines and maybe between the tears, we hear another very subtle statement, which is, I can live elsewhere and have a tremendously full Jewish life. The whole Torah is equivalent to the land of Israel. Okay, maybe even that is where I can live the full Jewish Torah life, actually outside of the land, because the two are equal, are parallel. And I think a statement that I'm hearing more and more from world Jewry is, please, Israel Jewry, recognize that we are flourishing. Judaism is creative, it's diverse, it's rich, and it's free. I remember going to the first wedding I went to in the United States. I was already a grown-up. And I stood watching what I witnessed, and I realized they were doing whatever they wanted. And that shocked me. And I think religion allows for many forms in world Jewry and in the United States in particular, because there's not one form which is mandated. And I think those voices are being heard more and more in Israel, but I think that's another thing that we can learn from world Jewry. And the last point I want to make before I hand it over to you, Yossi, is why I think it's important for us to recognize some of these things. And that is because I think there is value in a relationship that is among two equals, much more than a relationship which is paternal, a relationship that looks down at each other. We can talk a little bit maybe later on about what brings world Jewry to look down at Israeli Jewry and Israeli Jewry to look down at world Jewry. But if there's no knowledge of each other's experiences, then there's no chance for an equality in that relationship, and then there's no way to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Avital. Yossi Klein Halevi, Senior Fellow at the Hartman Institute. Yossi, I think you've been in Israel, I think we talked about this the other day, half of the country's life and just about half of your life. I don't think you're quite 70 yet. But so you have experience in both as a young adult and as a mature adult here. So how do you fit all these comments from our first two speakers into this big picture?
Well, hi everybody, and thank you, Alan, and thank you, Shira and Avital. I completely endorse just about everything that both of you said, but I'm still going to argue some very basic premises about the conversation itself. and there seems to me to be something outdated about the premise that we're discussing, because the question really is these days, who is turning away from whom? Who is invalidating the other's Jewish life? What I see happening in Israel in relation to American Jewry is more curiosity than I've ever seen before, impelled in large part by anxiety, because Israelis are beginning to realize that we can't take American Jewish support for granted anymore, which is potentially a good thing in that it's focusing the attention of some Israelis, at least, on American Jewry. Another example is linguistic. Most Israelis that I know don't use the term Yordim anymore to speak about Israelis who leave the country. We say Mahagrim, emigres. And I think that that's a telling indication of a profound ideological shift in the country, a maturation among Israelis. And it also comes from a place, I think, of humility, because we now know that we have screwed up in many basic ways. I think most Israelis sense something is not quite right here, and everyone will come up with their own list of what's not right. But I sense much more of a humility among Israelis than ever before. And I think that the growing threats to Israel from almost all of our borders, along with the ultimate threat of Iran, has also created a sense among Israelis that maybe this isn't going to be the ultimate refuge for the Jewish people. Maybe we did not create the safe refuge. So I find that Israelis are in a very different place today. Potentially, there is room for the kind of conversation that you're appealing for, Shira. I think that there's an open door, or at least a half-open door, where there was a closed door in the past. But my question to you, and it's a question to you just because you're the American Jew on the panel, and it's not really to you personally, is can we in Israel depend on American Jews anymore? And I'm asking that question in a very basic way. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people in this country, including people in government, who say, if we find ourselves in a war with Iran next month, are American Jews going to support us? Are the Jews of Brooklyn, of your Brooklyn? I grew up in Borough Park. So are the Jews of your Brooklyn going to support us? Israelis have a big question about that. Alan, you mentioned that a conversation that you and I had a couple days ago. I've lived in Israel now for 35 years, exactly half of the life of the country. And so I've really been going back, now that we're approaching the 70th anniversary, and trying to remind myself why I left America, why I decided to become an Israeli rather than an American Jew. And I used to give a whole series of answers, which I today find somewhat inadequate. I would say that maybe the main reason, especially in light of the growing alienation of so many American Jews toward Israel, maybe the main reason that I chose to come here is to reject American Jewish privilege. And American Jewish privilege is the privilege to turn away from Israel. Jews from the former Soviet Union, from Morocco, from Ethiopia, they don't have that privilege. They're here. They're stuck. This is their place. And I was very drawn to be part of that story of this is it. This is the final shore of Jewish history. This is the last gamble. And I felt I needed to be in that story. And the more that I see American Jews turning away from Israel, the more at peace I am with the choice that I've made, the choice that I made 35 years ago. Now, having said all that, and I could say more, and maybe I'll say one more difficult point before ending with a little bit of nechama. After the Iran deal passed, with, according to polls, the support of a majority of American Jews, I wrote an essay which was essentially why I am no longer interested in American Jewry. And fortunately, I never published it. And one of the dangers, of course, of social media is that it's instant. So I'm very slow. It takes me a long time to write, and in this case, that was really an advantage, because just as I rejected American Jewish privilege, I also reject Israeli privilege. I don't feel that I have the right to turn away from the diaspora. And so, as angry as I am, and I hope that I'll always stay angry, because the day that I lose my anger toward American Jews is the day I stop caring about you. And maybe the reverse is true too. And so I actually was quite relieved by the rage in the conservative and reform movements over the government's betrayal of its own agreement on the wall. And the reason that I was relieved is because it matters to you to have a stake in our public space. And I think that's a piece that we've missed in this conversation, is that the anger, I did not interpret that anger as alienation. I saw that anger as an affirmation of you were saying to us, but you promised that Zionism would create a public space that would reflect the wholeness of the Jewish people. And instead, you've turned over the keys of Judaism in the state of Israel, not just to a minority, but to that minority, the Haredim, who care least about Klal Yisrael, about the totality of the Jewish people. So I was in a way as encouraged by your anger as I was encouraged in retrospect by my anger over the Iran deal. And the last point that I'll make in that sense, in that context, is that I've learned over the years to love American Jewry in a way that I did not when I was growing up in Brooklyn. I did grow up in the wrong part of Brooklyn, it's true. But I've never felt really a part of the American Jewish community. I felt then what I don't feel now, which is that American Jewry is a dying community. I feel it's a deeply troubled community. We're deeply troubled here too. We have our troubles in different ways. But I have learned to cherish the kind of vitality, Avital, that you're talking about. The sense of being able not to be owned by Judaism, which I think is what most Israelis feel. You know, the yoke of the Torah can feel very literal here in Israel. And there's this sense of joy of those Jews, those American Jews who choose to be involved in Judaism, often experience this kind of uplift, which Israelis can be we're proud of our Judaism, we're ready to fight for our Judaism, but the sense of joy in Judaism, not always. So we have a lot to learn from you, I affirm that, but let's not leave out the part of what you guys need to learn from us. And I will start with Hebrew. You guys really, I loved your Hebrew, and I was so excited to hear an American rabbi speaking in Hebrew in the session before, and I realized it was so depressing to me because it's so rare. So I want to yell at the rabbis who don't know Hebrew as well as you do, but you're the one who's here, so you're getting it. And the Israeli extraordinary culture, the Hebrew culture that we've created, the music that has been created in this country, which is, I think, the most extraordinary Jewish music that's been created, maybe since the Hasidic movement, and piyut. We've brought that here with us, and we've transformed it into modern creations. So we have much to learn from you, and I believe that you have something to learn from us as well.
Thanks, Yossi. Shira, I want to say, first of all, that before you respond, that it really is unfair of us to ask you to speak for the diversity of American Jewry, not just all of American Jewry, but literally of Brooklyn Jewry, because I come from a third part of Brooklyn Jewry that isn't anything like either of the two Brooklyns that you know. So it's extraordinarily unfair, and I apologize for that now, perhaps a little belatedly. And second of all, I think that your point about the actual title of our session is interesting because it was created by Israelis in English, but with a very Israeli sensibility. I think it's something that Israelis might have said what American Jews need to understand is a very Israeli kind of an approach. And so, yes, we were a little provocative and wanted to, make it a little harif, a little spicy. But it isn't the kind of question even that an American would pose to Israelis. So I'll apologize for that as well. And now that I've finished apologizing, I want to give you a chance to respond both to Yossi and to Avital, and then we'll open it up. Everybody kind of join in and don't feel like you have to wait on me to point the finger or ask you to raise your hand.
So thank you. And I want to start, Yossi, one of the things that you said is when you moved here, I wrote it down, you thought this is the last gamble of Jewish history. And I think you stand by that. I think that's part to some extent. But you also expressed acknowledgement that there is vibrancy in Judaism outside of Israel. And I think actually, Alan, what you just said about the three Brooklyns, and there are more than three, and I know there are some Brooklynites in the room tonight, there are many, many Brooklyns and many Jewish Brooklyns, and that actually gets to the heart of part of what I'm here to say, which is just as there is so much richness and depth and so many pieces of Israeli society that are rounding out Judaism, there is so much richness and depth and different pieces of American Jewish society that are just as much a part of the Jewish story and will impact the Jewish future. We don't know what the Jewish future will be, but we know that it will be impacted by both of these stories, and one of them is not going to win and one of them is not going to lose any more than medieval Spain won or any of the other rich Jewish historical societies that existed at the same time or had some kind of influence on the future. We don't yet know what the future will be. We don't know which actually is safer. I'm being really honest. I think that that's true. I don't think we know whether it's safer to all be here in Eretz Yisrael and in Midnat Yisrael, or if it's safer to be in diaspora. And we can argue over whether we're safer because there is in Israel, which I would actually agree with that argument, but not everyone would. But we don't know because we can't predict the future, but we can impact the future. And I think that the richness of Jewish life does impact the future. Yossi, one of the things that you bring up, and I know for you, and we've had this conversation before, that Iran was for you a very big moment and a very big wound. And I'm aware as an American who sits in a different place and with a different perspective, and who actually believed that at the time that the Iran deal was actually a safer choice for Israel, and that can be debated politically, but that I know you see that as a wound, and that if, following your premise, it was allowing a mortal threat to Israel to be developed, and we did not stop it, or we did not rise up to stop it, that somehow we were not loyal to the Jewish people. That's the argument that I've heard. I think it raises a few questions. First of all, about what does loyalty mean and how does our relationship work? I think for Americans, the idea of loyalty is the word itself has a different valence for us than it does for Israelis, ne'emanut, right? I think when we think of loyalty tests as Jews, we get very worried. American history has a very deep and challenging history with what it means to be loyal, and Jews are often questioned on our loyalty, and we have a very in history, and I think we respond to that word differently. But I think the concept of are we loyal, and does that mean that we will always run to the aid when the Jewish people somewhere else are in trouble? I think that's a complicated question. I can't give an unqualified yes that American Jews, all of us, all of them, will run to the aid of Israelis. But if they have a Jewish identity, and if I succeed in my work of helping people feel a part of something bigger than themselves, which I think is a huge part of what it is for my colleagues and for me, to be helping people who live in a society where connection to group and expressing group identity is countercultural. I think that for us to help people see themselves as part of something, even more so part of something international and part of something historic, is a critical piece. But when we get back to the metaphors we were talking about earlier, I want to continue with this metaphor. It's new for me today. I was responding to Danielle's metaphor of the grown parents and the grown children. But if we are both grown children, I am not sure exactly the right way to come to your aid. I need you to tell me when you need help. And sometimes I will, because I am your sibling, I have a desire to help you. I can't always rescue you from yourself. And some of what you've done as an adult, I might have some judgment about the choices you've made that makes it even harder to rescue you when you continue to behave that way. And so when you ask me, you bring up Iran, I sit with a community that brings up African refugees. So how, when we are siblings and we have a relationship with each other and we see each other at times behaving in ways that really bother us, do we say, yes, I'm here for you, even though you're doing this thing that I can't stand and feels so contrary to the way I think our family should behave? But the question of whether I'll jump to your rescue, I think, I don't know the answer of whether we should jump to your rescue. Do I, as a rabbi and as myself and as a Zionist, feel a need to have this relationship so that I know even why, and to even understand why you're asking the question the way you are? Yes. And I hope that that leads to both of us to feel a shared responsibility when the time comes, whenever it comes, to look out for each other's aid.
I want to share two thoughts, one about the things you're saying and one about the question you're posing, Yossi. I'm also thinking about this metaphor of home. I guess I had mixed feelings about it when it was raised, and I felt a lot of anxiety when you pushed it even further. And I'm asking myself why and in what way. I think you are correct that it's hard to create new traditions in one's parents' home. Okay? I think that's accurate and powerful, and a powerful use of the metaphor. And I was asking myself, like you raised, the question of Hebrew and the dual role that Hebrew plays. And it's really the dual role that an anchor plays. An anchor, on the one hand, keeps us in the same place. Okay? And on the other hand, gives us a lot of freedom. And we come from a tradition which, the degree that we want to maintain it, is extremely powerful and teaches us how to grow beyond it. That's its power. It takes us to new places. And I think there is an element in which the growth of the tradition is limited when there isn't that anchor of Hebrew. Okay? Now, that said, actually, I think world Jewry is doing something very traditional, living as a minority, not on its land. That's the way Jews have lived for the last 2,000 years. And the innovative thing is actually happening in Israel. In the sense of who moved into their parents' home, I think maybe you guys did. But for sure, part of what attracts me to being here is that the language in which I think of the way you described it is that I want to be part of this new Jewish experiment. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I can't not be part of the opportunity to be a majority and sovereign and owner of power and see how that can play out. But that's a personal statement. But I think that's how I understand what is innovative here, okay? And why I feel I'm creating a totally new home. It's also where sometimes my tradition is lacking because we didn't develop in the same way regarding these questions. So there's a need for a new creation. So I think those are my thoughts about the home. I want to share a thought about the question you posed, Yossi, regarding can we count on American Jews? I don't remember. Can we count on world Jewry? Depend on world Jewry. So the first thing that came to mind is I asked myself, depend on them for what? To me, it's clear that I can depend on world Jewry to insist that both Jewishly and as a country, I act in a way that thinks of values in which equality and egalitarianism and humanism take central place. I will be demanded, I can count on world Jewry to demand of me to do that. And that the notion of Tzelem Elohim, that all men were created equal, that all people were created equal, be one that guides the way we build this country. We create, we exist in this country. So I think in that sense I can depend on them. And I guess what also I started asking myself is, can they depend on us? And I think part of the tension that has been growing is because I hear from my American students and from my American colleagues, I can count on you less and less. And they're talking mainly of values and not of security. But that is something that they are telling me loud and clear. And I agree with you that when I am unlucky, they're not even saying it because they don't care to be in conversation anymore. And when I'm lucky, they're criticizing me. But that is something that I need to hear from them. And if I want to be in relationship with Shira and build something Jewish together, I need to be able to hear that question as well and respond to it.
Well, I think that the danger of this moment in our relationship is that we are threatening each other's most basic sense of security, either spiritually or physically. And certain directions of Israel, you mentioned the African refugees, one could certainly add to the list, raises the question that for liberal American Jews, the core of their Jewishness is Tikkun Olam, and Israel seems to be betraying Tikkun Olam. And the reciprocal sense of betrayal that many of us here feel is that is the growing use of American Jewish privilege to turn away from this story. Now, I agree with you, Shira, that American Jews and Israelis need to start seeing each other as equals, as Jewish grown-ups, who are responsible for the future of the Jewish people. We also need to begin seeing each other as shared custodians for the future of Judaism. And that's something that has not been part of our relationship until now. I believe deeply, and that's what I've been trying to say about why I moved here, is that this is the center point. I don't believe in two equal poles. I don't believe in, Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. I think that the Yerushalmi is the center. And but I don't need you as an American Jew to agree with me. And I can still be in a strong relationship with you, and we'll disagree. Which community is more important? Does it matter if one community is more? To me, it matters deeply in terms of my understanding of what Judaism means, of what 4,000 years of Jewish history means. I cannot read this story without understanding Israel as the center point. But if you read it differently, then we will continue to be in loving disagreement.
And the day you stop being angry.
Yes, and but but again, what I need to know from American Jews, and I'm not hearing it, and I don't mean from you, again, really speaking about the American Jewish, what I'm not hearing, or what I'm hearing less and less from American Jews, including some very close friends of mine, is that American Jewish privilege remains very much on the agenda. And I need to know not that American Jews are in this relationship uncritically. I don't want an uncritical relationship, but I do want an unconditional relationship, because my relationship with you is unconditional, and I need to know that that's reciprocal.
So, Shira, let me just ask you about that. The term privilege, of course, at least in the American context, is very fraught these days, and that's not really the topic for today. But do you see that, do you kind of agree with Yossi's premise that the privilege of American Jews is to turn away from Israel and then still claim a rich Jewish life without Israel being center? In fact, I think this is repeated every 4 years at presidential elections when the post-election surveys are done. Israel is third or fourth or fifth on the list of the issues that brought American Jews to the polls. And so that is clearly in play, how important Israel is and who's, again, we don't want to play the blame game, but why is that coming from, and where does this privilege, is this real?
Thank you. And I do think that the word privilege has a lot of valence to it right now. And I think that I know it's why you've used it. And I also think when I think about American Jewish privilege, I'm usually talking about something very different than what you're talking about right now, which I think is also very important, but not the topic that we're talking about. So I just want to be clear, especially for an American audience, normatively, when I'm talking about American Jewish privilege, it usually has to do with our resources, our whiteness, many other things. I know. But I also think you asked the question, or maybe by stating the question as saying we have a privilege to be able to turn away, I think this also gets to the heart of the problem and the question of what is Zionism now. Because what you're saying in saying that we have the privilege to turn away is an acknowledgement that we're safe and we don't need Israel to be safe. If we have the privilege to turn away, it's an acknowledgement that actually Israel is not the last gasp of the Jewish people, but that we are safe enough to turn away. And you can say, perhaps we're not. Perhaps that's a fallacy. Perhaps that's an American misunderstanding. And I think I've heard that from many, many Israelis or others. But I think to say that we have the privilege to turn away is suggesting that we are safe enough without an Israel, that we don't need you to back us up, and therefore we can turn around. And so I just want to point that out in the premise. And I think that one of... So the question of... I want to think of how I want to state this, Yossi. When we are thinking about what it is to turn away, I think also the question is what is drawing us to turn towards. And for many American Jews, for many of the American Jews with whom I spend my days, their connection to Judaism is one that comes from a sense of mission, as Avital said, that comes from one of an understanding of being part of a narrative as an individual, maybe not as much as part of a collective, and a mission universally, l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, in relationship with God to better perfect the world. And as you said, being created in the image of God is just as much for us, for our neighbors who are not Jewish, as it is for our neighbors who are Jewish. We don't privilege necessarily as Americans that one person or another person is more valuable or worthy as having been created. And one of the concerns when you ask Alan about the where is it on our list of priorities, I have a Facebook friend who lives in New Jersey who posted on Facebook. Recently it was like the 23rd day of January, and there were or the 11th day of January, 23 gun deaths of children in the United States. And I guess there is a local politician or maybe a state politician in New Jersey who is very, very much a strong supporter of the state of Israel, very much a supporter of the current administration's policies on the state of Israel, the Trump administration, and has a, 100% rating from the National Rifle Association, which in the United States means very lax on laws restricting certain kinds of guns. And the person who posted said, I think this senator needs to be, or Congress, I'm not from New Jersey, but this person needs to be voted out. And someone said, but don't you care about Israel? And she said, I do care about Israel, but I don't want my children to be shot tomorrow, and that's primary for me. So I think when we get to these questions of values and will she vote single issue? Would I vote single issue for Israel over domestic issues that are critical to me as a human being? Probably not. Probably not. And I think it's unfair. I think that's a similar question when you ask about should you choose policies that might be against your security in order to support my values? You're asking me the same question, right? And I think it's very hard. This is where we need to talk to each other more. And I think it's my job to inspire people to want to have the conversation. But saying to me, you have to love me, it doesn't usually engender love, right? Saying, let me meet you, let me help you see ways why I care about you and hope you'll care about me, that engenders a relationship. And that's the work that I'm trying to do.
I want to turn to some questions that we've gotten from our viewers. And if anybody in the room wants to ask a question, I will ask you first to come up to the microphone and queue there, and we will get to you very quickly. So while I ask this first question, and the panelists, I think this is something all the panelists can address briefly, then please come up to the microphone and get ready for those questions. So this first question is from Janet Lipsy, and I don't know where she's from. I didn't get that from her in her email. I apologize for that. But Janet had an interesting question because it comes on the heels of what you said, Shira, about come see us, come visit us. Now, you had great experiences with the shlichim and the shlichot of who came to you in the early days. But most Israelis, when they go to America, see America as either Disneyland or a shopping mall. And maybe they stop at a synagogue. Yeah, maybe. If they happen to be around for a holiday. I don't know. Beit Chabad for dinner. Right. Okay. So yet another Brooklyn comes into play here. So if that's true, then so let me come to Janet's question, which is, what do you think of the idea of sending Israeli teens to the U.S., similar to birthright, kind of a reverse birthright, in order to understand American Jews more fully or at all? And I'll add for our Israeli panelists, perhaps instead of the trip to Poland, which is the birthright of Israeli high school kids, and we'll come back to that. Hopefully, I would like to hear you on that. But Shira, I think that your first question, is there a way to do this, and how would you do it so that it isn't just a shopping trip?
It's a great question, and I was reading just today about this question about teen trips to Poland right now, and I thought it would be great if the trips were to see a living community. Not that there shouldn't be memory. That was not what I was trying to suggest. So one of the things that I think it's a great idea if philanthropists could and would get behind it, and I actually think I would say that I'd rather that they modeled the program on something called Honeymoon Israel than on the program of Birthright Israel. For those of you who haven't heard of it, it's a program we work very closely with at the 14th Street Y. And I actually had the experience a year ago of bringing 20 American couples in the first 5 years of their marriage to come and experience Israel together as they were thinking about what kind of homes they were going to have and what kind of families they were going to have. And a great experience of them to have both community building and in a real immersive experience. As an educator, I know and we know that immersive experiences are huge. And so imagine if young Israeli couples in the first 5 years of their relationships had an opportunity to be brought together in communities where they were having immersive experiences together, thinking about what their values and Jewish values are, talking about it with their partners, meeting Americans who were having those conversations, and then both going home to build their homes. I think that could be incredibly powerful. It's a great idea, Janet, wherever you are.
Avital and Yossi, especially in light of the primarily Israeli experience of the Masat LePoland, the trip to Poland that Israeli high school students take, which is extremely powerful and also very difficult. And in many ways, I've seen it in my own family and people we know, as off-putting as it is energizing. You seem to come back, the kids come back with either extreme. So is an American birthright perhaps a better idea than the trip to Poland? Or how would you put all this together to increase these immersive experiences in a positive way?
Right. I think it's a brilliant idea. It's not the first time I've heard of it. And I want to say where I think it would be powerful. I think, first of all, what we perceive as possible Jewishly would be expanded as Israelis. If we see ways in which Jews that don't live in the land of Israel live, I think what is possible there is broader. That's number one. Number two, I think we would actually learn that there's a lot similar happening and that maybe we could enrich each other in things that are similar. Less loneliness, maybe. Number three, I think identity-wise, it would be fascinating. I just heard a young American woman describe the shift in her identity from being on American campuses the Jew to coming here and being the American. In other words, I think for Israelis, it would be the shift from being an Israeli to being a Jew. And working out that element of identity would be fascinating and very, very important. The third notion I want to say, which I have mixed feelings about, and if we get a chance, maybe you'll share your thoughts about it, is the notion of Or LaGoyim, a light upon the nations. And I wonder, I often think about it of we should be this ideal country. But I think existing as a minority, right, going to a rally of Black Lives Matter with a kippah is a different kind of way of being a light upon the nations. And I wonder if that's not so bad for Israelis to think about and to reflect about as they go about life. And I think that's maybe another dimension such a birthright could do.
Yeah, aside from going with a kippah to a Black Lives Matter rally, I agree, endorse everything that's been said here. I think it's a really useful approach. So.
I'd like to take a few questions from our audience, and here are the ground rules. As I said, I'll say it one last time. Please make it a question and not a speech. Start off telling us your name and where you're from, and we're going to take 3 questions at once so that our panelists have a chance to kind of chew over the ones that resonate with them, and then we'll try and get all of them answered. So the first 3 who've queued up, please ask your question. Tell us again your name and where you're from and your question.
My name is Shmuel Ur, and I'm from the Galilee, from Shorashim, which is a conservative community. My question is the following. My cousin is a Reform Rabbi in Palo Alto. Her daughter grew up in a Zionist house, went to college, found out that Israel is not what she thought, and joined the BDS. And the questions that I have is, how common is it for young people that go to colleges?
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next.
My name is Yaakov Taub. I'm from Kibbutz Kfar Etzion. Been in Israel for 47 years. And I was a bit disappointed by Yossi Klein Halevi's apologetics. You didn't always think that way. I've been following you for a long time. But my question, growing up as a nice Jewish boy with a good Jewish education, and B'techazena B'shuvcha L'Tzion B'rachamim was a big part of growing up as a Jew. I would like to ask Shira, I asked you before also, if that is part of Judaism, and I'm not sure if it is part of the Reform Judaism, but what about all the Reform Jews that are intermarrying? That's also a big part of what's happening in the States. I'd like to hear.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. Yes.
Hi, my name is Daphne Moshayov. I live down the block here. I just want to say that one thing is that I think American Jews made a major influence into our life as being not religion, growing up not learning how to be a Jew, and creating this bitza, as we can call this area, of really being a feminist Jewish activist down here in this south part of Jerusalem. The question is, how can we increase it on one hand, and on the other hand, how can we really get together? Because from what I know, we hardly know one another, and most Israelis don't know American Jews, and vice versa. Most Americans who don't live in New York hardly know any kind of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a question about BDS on university campuses, intermarriage, and how to spread the light of Southern Jerusalem's diverse creative Judaism to the rest of the world. So anybody, feel free to jump in. I'm not going to point any fingers. You all can answer these questions by yourselves without my asking. Somebody?
I get BDS, intermarriage.
All right, you're the...
And,
okay.
oh, wow, okay. So I'm representing all, I'm looking for my colleagues out there on the camera who also have different experiences as well, which I think is very important. I know Yaakov actually asked me earlier about the intermarriage question, and I had said that I would address it here, and I didn't. So I think that I will take a moment to address that, as I had said. The reason that I had thought that it was going to be when I spoke, as I was planning and didn't, to describe my community a little bit, and to talk about the vibrancy, which in the earlier lecture, for those who are here, I spoke about the vibrancy of both the Brooklyn that I live in and the Manhattan downtown that I work in. And I will say that at my JCC that serves 26,000 people, the 14th Street Y, about 26,000 people come every year. We have a summer camp with 800 children. We have Ganim with lots of children. And the summer camp, for example, we did a survey, and we found out that at our Jewish summer camp, 70% of the families have at least one Jewish parent, which means 30% of the children at the camp are not, ostensibly are probably not there because of Jewish identity. They're there because they think it's a good camp, though that's also a question that could be raised. And that 70% of them we know have at least one Jewish parent, and anecdotally we know that many of them have a non-Jewish parent. The same when I took the group of Honeymoon Israel that I spoke about before. I think nationally the statistic of honeymoon is similar to the generation. It's about 60%. The generation of non-Orthodox American Jews under the age, I need Stephen Cohn to give me my talking points. Though I disagree many times with a demographer or a sociologist like Stephen when he looks at the third generation and says that they're not Jewishly identified and that's why we're dying. And so that's what I actually want to speak to about the intermarriage, because I know the narrative, and I am in my generation, I'm in that middle generation and the ones whose grandchildren are being counted. And I know what it means for the friends of my parents' generation to have intermarried. And it's something very different than what it means for the parents in my gan. The parents in my gan did not feel that they were being disloyal to the Jewish people by marrying a non-Jew. Nobody actually, mostly, other than maybe here, but in their community, that's not what they were told. And that's not what they feel. They don't feel that they stepped out. They actually feel that they welcomed someone in. I think that that's a very important differentiation, that when I offer a class in the winter, in December often, for parents about, how do we handle December in our family when there's Hanukkah and there's Christmas? And I taught a class last year where the majority of the people who came were non-Jewish parents looking to better understand how Hanukkah, what it means, what it was, and also how to support the fact that their spouse had a complicated relationship with the Christmas tree that they had because they didn't identify it as a Christian thing, the non-Jewish parent, because most of them are not practicing a religion themselves. Now, the other thing I would say is that some of those parents see something tremendous in Judaism. The 30% non-Jews, I sat with a Catholic parent recently who said, I really love my Catholicism and my child fell in love with Judaism and I'm really trying to figure out what to do. And I said to her, well, have you shared your Catholicism with her? Which she hadn't. And so she's taking her daughter to church to figure out what her spirituality is. But what does it mean for all of those Jewish parents and those married to Jewish parents who are becoming inspired to something that they didn't yet know? What those grandchildren are going to be, I think, are going to look very different than today's grandchildren of the people who intermarried. And it's because we're doing that work. We're opening the doors. We're saying we want to help you experience and explore your identity and figure out what it means to you. So that's how I would answer. And it's not a demographic answer. It is very much an experiential answer. And I think we'll have to see in 1 and 2 generations how that plays out. I want to give the floor to either of my colleagues. You're like, take the BDS question.
One of the things that is new to me is an identity of being a rabbi. And one of the outcomes of that new identity of mine is that it's happened now a few times that people have asked me to marry them. And by definition, I'm doing it not within the boundaries of the rabbinate. And one of the questions I asked myself is, what is my responsibility vis-a-vis their Jewish identity? Because I don't have, if you want to call it the protection and if you want to call it the limitation of the rabbinate, I don't have a clear definition of it. I think I have a couple of thoughts that maybe are relevant. One is, I listen to you and I'm very moved by the stories and I am worried about the watering down. The watering down. I'm worried about that. I don't know what that means as we go forward. Does it mean a richness and more voices, or does it mean a watering down? That's a concern I have. And I think the second concern I have is the question of the role of covenant. Can it in a deep way remain a covenant? I'll go back to the story I brought up before of the people leaving the land of Israel and weeping, but saying living outside of the land of Israel is equivalent to being fully in covenant. And the full acceptance, which is part of the power of American Jewry today, might also be putting in question the strength of the covenant. And I think that, again, it's a concern that I have. So I think those are two thoughts I have. That's one. I think, actually, the second question I want to relate to was Daphna's question. Yes. And I want to say two things. The first thing I want to say, what % of American Jews live in the New York Broad area?
It's actually something, it's a statistic I don't know, and I wanted to know before I came here.
30 or 40%. In other words, I think partially what I want to say is
and
that...
also I think an important statistic, I don't know the statistic, but I think that the move to urban areas is very important in American Jewish life, that Jews are much more moving back into urban areas. And then the younger Jews live in cities, not as much in suburbs.
Interesting. So I think partially the statistic about New York Jews was amazing for me to hear, because I, like you, am used to thinking, oh, I live in this little bubble. This bubble is insignificant. And New York is also this little insignificant. But it's not that way. In other words, what happens in the two centers that are only a certain % of the broad demographic is actually significant. Both the numbers there are big and significant, and they are a radiating core. They are a core that I feel can affect. And you described visiting on a regular basis. And I think part of our responsibility is to visit there on a regular basis.
Maybe not just New York.
No, not just New York.
Seattle,
I fully
Chicago.
agree. We need to go and encounter American Judaism, and maybe it would be better if there are mechanisms and if philanthropists create a birthright and so on and so forth. But I think it's like there's an expectation for them to come and visit us and get to know that world Jewry should come and know Israeli Jewry. I think it's our responsibility to know American Jewry. When we, as a kid, when we traveled around the world, we would always go to the local synagogue to feel that was part of what traveling meant. And I think we need to maintain that.
Let me save the panel from the question on BDS because I'd like to say that I think that there is certainly an issue on some American university campuses, but as diverse as the American Jewish experience is, the American university experience is even more so, with thousands of universities and the range of communities on them, Jewish and non-Jewish and Jewish communities facing challenges from BDS activists is quite broad. And without too much of a commercial for the Hartman Institute, we do have a program with Hillel directors and as in many strong universities. And on a personal basis, I was at the University of Oregon just a few months ago, which is where I went to graduate school. And I sat with a lot of Jewish students, although that wasn't the purpose of my visit. And I asked them about that. And they, I think, are representative more so than the ones you hear about in the newspaper all the time, which is there are issues. They have Jewish and Muslim communities that actually have dialogue. Israel is a challenge, but they're addressing it in respectful ways. And maybe, again, you could say, Eugene, Oregon is kind of outside of the norm, but I think in some ways it's more the norm than the extremes that you hear about. And as a former journalist, I think I'm permitted to say that journalists often illustrate the extremes and miss the 90% that's between those two extremes. So BDS is an issue, and it's not the time or place to get into an extended conversation about that. But I wouldn't worry that any American Jewish kid who goes to university is going to come back as a BDS supporter. We have a few more questions before we run out of time. So again, 3 questions from our audience, and your name and your rank and serial number, as it were.
Alan, there's just 4 left.
4. Oh, Yisrael, anything you say. Oh, no. Anything, whenever you got it. 4 questions, we'll take them real quick.
David Pilzer from Efrat. My question is, do American Jews see religious significance in the state of Israel? To color that somewhat, I suspect not. Last year, this time, I was on a trip to the American South. I visited the historic Reform synagogues in Savannah, Georgia, New Orleans, and Charleston, South Carolina. In all of them, I asked if there was any marking of Israel Independence Day. It was almost an irrelevant question.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Netta Asner. I'm from Jerusalem. I actually was a student in Hartman Girls High School, and I'm currently studying Jewish history in the Hebrew University. I also co-founded this project called Siach, which connects between Jewish, Israeli, and American students. My question is, from my work and involvement, I've noticed that students specifically are very apathetic, and my question is, what do you think that we should be doing something besides the American birthright that you guys suggested, or Israeli birthright to America? And should we be doing anything at all? Should we be worried specifically about the students and the young people who are basically the future of the Jewish society?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Aaron. I'm from Teaneck, New Jersey, and Spokane, Washington. I've been living mostly in Jerusalem, but in Israel, Palestine overall for the last 3.5 years. I think we may have crossed paths about a decade ago in Artsa corridors, Rabbi Koch Epstein. I was raised in EIE, Jewish summer camp, now doing a master's at Hebrew U here as on various Hasbara engagements over the course of college, and now organize with a group called All That's Left. I'm going to get there.
And please get to there, because I think we have 5 actually questions.
I organize with a group called All That's Left that are Jews like me that have not chosen to reconnect with Judaism out of political expediency, but out of a certain calling. And we stand off behind in direct action and opinion-changing work, Israelis and Palestinians that oppose the occupation. I don't want to return to the BDS question. But my question is, for the panel, 1, is there something, and if there is, what is it that Israelis can understand about the community like ours, which I believe is growing, albeit perhaps slowly and in kind of complex ways? And 2, where on this depend on or betray us continuum that was drawn in some of the opening remarks does a group and work like this stand?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
My name is Ariella Savitz. I'm from New Jersey, and I'm currently on the Chavruta Gap Year program here. So I was raised in a very Zionist community, discussed Israel politics often. And then coming to this program, meeting some Israelis, I found out that they had little to no background in Charlottesville. Most of them had not heard of it. And many of them also further discussed their history education, and it's a very ha'aretz versus chutz la'aretz educational system. Do you feel that the Israeli education of history in particular has played a role in this gap of Israeli responsibility versus American responsibility? And if so, does it need to be altered in any sense to fix this gap?
Thank you very much. And our last questioner from the audience, please. Just turn the mic to yes.
My name is Eileen Lee. I made Aliyah from San Francisco in 2011. I live down the street. My question is, looking into the future, after the visions that we share of deep, loving, respectful reciprocity between our communities is reached, can you give a practical example or two of what will be different?
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we have a few minutes left, and so let's go, panelists. Maybe each of you take a question, and then we'll be able to incorporate as much of that as we can in our as we wrap things up here. Shira.
So I just want to respond. I think it came up earlier also to David about the religious significance of the state of Israel. And I think the question was also just about, I think Yaakov asked earlier also about Reform Judaism. And as a Reform rabbi, I just want to respond quickly to a piece of that. And I'll just say I'm happy to speak to anyone after. I actually wrote my rabbinic thesis on Zion and Israel in Reform liturgy in its evolution from the earliest stages until now, and all of the different prayer books that and how they dealt with O Chadash Ad Zion Ta'ir and the return of the exiles to Jerusalem. And I will say that there was a Reform Zionist think tank, which I also worked with, that Artza led in the 20th century. You can read a lot about Reform Zionism, and it is a religious Zionism. I don't think that speaks to all American or all even Reform Jews, but I think it's important to know that there is a very religious Reform Zionism that exists. And I'm happy. I think it's a separate conversation. But I also want to just get to the question, or I just want to sort of put together something that I think I heard as a through line in some of these questions, which was younger people have a different sense of what matters than older people. That's always true. That is always true. The people who are determining what we are, who's sitting up here, are generally older people, and that is also true. And the question of how do we figure out how to deal with the questions of relevance for the younger generation is, some of it is always that we need to listen, and some of it is we need to have understanding. And I think the other thing that goes here is that when we're in different cultures, we also necessarily have different languages or different understandings of what's important. And I think that goes to I think we share some culture, Americans and Israelis, but I think we also have certain parts of our culture that we don't share, which comes up with the question about, do Israelis know anything about history outside of Israel, or about American history, to even understand why we American Jews as Americans have these notions of equality or of democracy or of the rights of minorities that are so critical and essential to our identity, that bring into question when we see Israel behaving in ways that doesn't necessarily align with those values, that bring us to ask the very critical and challenging questions that I think are being asked. And I go back to the premise I had at the beginning, that I believe you can only have a deep, nuanced relationship by starting with hello. How are you? Let me listen, and let me try to understand where you're coming from. I hope you'll say hello and listen. And I think the programmatic things we've started to talk about, of bringing people together to have those conversations, I can't predict the future for Eileen of what the outcomes will be, but I can predict that if we take all of this talking and we turn it into action, it's going to have to look like people talking to and listening to each other. And sometimes it starts by just inviting people to the table. So I also want to thank Hartman, because I think that's what we're doing here. And it's true that only the people who care are most likely to be listening. But sometimes we have to be the Meshugaim Ledavar, to say, hey, come talk to us. We really want to talk to you. So,
some final thoughts then. Avital and Yossi, please.
I was just at a conference with a lot of young people. It was our alumni reunion of Hadar. and there were probably about 200 people in the room. And it always amazes me when the blessing for the state, Tfilah l'Shalom Hamdina, and right after that, a blessing for the government of the United States, which you can imagine for many of the young people in the room is loaded at the moment and not very simple. And neither one. And I think to the neither one I want to relate, because I think the answer to the religious significance, and maybe it's also part of the answer to the question of the future, is that on Yom HaAtzmaut, there is a religious significance to that moment. Also in times where there is a more complex view of what is happening, or a more critical view of what is happening. We definitely need to worry that young Israelis don't know about what's happening in the Jewish community in America. A friend just told me, after spending 2 years in Israel, that when reading the newspapers in Israel, he could get a very good feel of the politics in America, but he knew nothing of what was happening in the Jewish community. Okay? So maybe it's just a little bit, we need to be more informed, and that's one simple tool, and that relates to the question of history. I think actually the way history is taught reflects an attitude much more than it is the cause of the attitude, though it might be the tool to change the attitude. Okay? And the last thing I want to say, which is about the future, but also maybe about how we can, another dimension of the relationship that can be built. In Hebrew, there's this expression, Dvarim shero'im misham lo ro'im mikan. Things that you see from nearby, you can't, or from far away, you don't always see from nearby. And in feminism, in feminist thought and theory, we use the notion of mabat me'ashulayim, of seeing things from the outskirts, from the periphery. Okay, and that often from the periphery, you recognize things about the center that you can't see. You're just blind to when you're in the center. And I wonder if a future relationship is one where we can play those roles for each other, where we have enough security in our own identity and in the relationship such that we can tell each other about what's going on, because by definition we see it from further away and we see it from the periphery, but that can be the basis for a mutual relationship.
Yossi, please.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to the question that you raised from all that's left, because and not to go into a debate now about the questions of is it occupation or how do we get out of that situation, but really on the how the rise of a growing far left among American Jews impacts on the health of our relationship. And it's one of the aspects of the relationship that most worries me, because one of the negative consequences of the geographical distance between us is that it's easy to fall into a kind of an unrealistic understanding of Israel's dilemmas. And many Israelis, maybe a majority of Israelis, have to some extent internalized the left-right debate so that it's happening inside us. It's not just happening between rival political camps. And what I find when I go back to speak in the American Jewish community is that the polarization is greater there, certainly on the question of the future of the territories, than it is here today. That we've internalized the polarization inside ourselves, and many American Jews are still where Israeli society was at in the 80s and 90s. And the reason this worries me in terms of the health of the relationship is that I very much want American Jews to be part of the conversation here. I need, for the health of my society, I need the voice, the perspective of true friends of Israel who can see things with a little bit of perspective. But when the far left essentially abandons any connection to the Israeli narrative about why the peace process failed and adopts the Palestinian narrative completely, as I believe your organization has done, then what we have is really a dead end in the conversation. When I hear you speak, I have nothing more to say to you. I say, well, doesn't he understand what's happened here over the last 20 years? Does he know the history of the year 2000? Most Israeli Jews, the overwhelming majority of Israeli Jews, believe that we really tried to end the occupation. And so even many of us who deeply believe that we need to end the occupation for our mental health, and sorry if I'm being a little apologetic here, Yaakov, but the truth is I was afraid that I was being the Israeli curmudgeon, so you kind of relieved me in a way. And so what I see is that there's a growing disconnect in how most Israelis understand how we got to this situation and how many growing numbers of American Jews understand the situation. And that really worries me precisely because I want American Jews to be part of our conversation. But I need American Jews to understand the complexity of Israel's dilemmas. I need American Jews to understand what we face on a daily basis and that it's not just about the occupation. And I think most of us here believe that if we were to end the occupation tomorrow, it would not bring us one step closer to peace. And so for the sake of a healthy American Jewish-Israeli relationship, I need partners in anguish. I need partners who can really understand what we go through here. And at the same time, partners who will be able to tell me, to call me on when we are not being faithful to Jewish history with the African refugees, for example. I need those partners. But if what I hear from American Jews is occupation, 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 then I won't hear you on the African refugees. And that's something that we need to be very mindful of because we really need your voice.
I want to thank everybody, our panelists, our audience for the excellent questions, the audience that I hope has stayed with us throughout this long program online. This video will be available on the Hartman website shortly afterward, maybe not tonight or tomorrow, but within a day or so. So you're welcome to review it and tell your friends about it. Again, thank you very much. We have a break here now. And there's more to come with the Hartman program today. Thank you very much.